Today, we're looking into a really compelling and pretty heartbreaking story. It takes us back to April 13th, 2006. We're in Blairsville, Pennsylvania. It's usually described as this sleepy factory town about 42 miles east of Pittsburgh, a place where you'd think comfort, safety, that's just a given.
Right, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone or feels like they do.
Yeah.
Very close-knit.
Exactly. But on this one afternoon, the peace at 233 South Spring Street was just shattered. A gruesome discovery there kicked off what became one of Pennsylvania's most shocking murder cases. It's a story filled with betrayal, some incredible forensic work, and this long search for justice.
You know, for a community like Blairsville, something this brutal, it's not just a headline. It really does, as the report said, kind of drop a bomb.
Mm-hmm.
The impact, the psychological ripples, they spread out and last for decades, really.
Yeah.
It changes how people feel in their own homes, their own town.
Absolutely. And it all started with something so mundane, so neighborly. A young boy lives right next door. He's just going over to return a videotape. Remember those?
Huh? Barely. But yeah, the simple act.
So he walks up to the house, and he notices something. Well, chilling. A lot of blood. Pooling under this ornamental window near the front door. His alarm just shoots up, he gets a bit closer, looks through that window, and sees a pair of feet.
Oh, wow. Just devastating for a kid to see.
Right. He immediately knew something was horribly wrong, didn't even hesitate. He ran, got his older brother, their uncle, their grandfather. They all go back together, probably hoping, maybe he was mistaken.
But he wasn't, was he?
No. The scene they found was horrific, just blood everywhere. Saturated the place. They checked on the victim, but it was clear he was already gone. That's when they called 911. It was 3:25 p.m.
And the Blairsville police officers who got dispatched, they walked into what many of them later called the most brutal murder scene they'd ever encountered. I mean, this town hadn't seen a murder in, 2 decades? They were overwhelmed. They just didn't have the resources or, frankly, the specific homicide experience needed.
So right away, they knew they needed help.
Absolutely. It became very clear very fast. They had to call in the Pennsylvania State Police for the forensic side of things.
Or there's this detail as we get into the facts that sticks with you. The victim, Dr. John Yelnick, apparently he had a premonition. He'd told friends he knew he was going to be murdered. Can you even imagine living with that kind of dread?
Gosh, no. That adds a whole other layer of tragedy, doesn't it, knowing he sort of saw it coming.
It really does. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to meticulously unpack the facts, the timeline, who was involved, the critical evidence, and the investigation that led to a really surprising, honestly, an astonishing conclusion. Okay, let's unpack this. The crime scene, a scene of unadulterated rage. So let's put ourselves at 233 South Spring Street with those first responders. They walk in. What's the immediate picture? What does the scene itself tell them straight away?
Well, the descriptions are pretty stark. Like we said, copious blood, first seen under that broken window pane by the front door. Then, inside, right away, investigators see blood smears. On a hallway wall, the struggle was clearly violent. Drapes ripped right off their posts, lying on the floor, soaked in blood.
So, not a quiet attack. Dynamic, forceful.
Exactly. The forensic scream struggle.
And the blood patterns are key here, right? You hear about smears and cast-off. What's the difference, and what did that mean here?
That's a really critical distinction, yeah. Smears like on the wall usually means something bloody was dragged or wiped against it, simple contact. But cast off, that's different. Those are droplets flung off a moving object that's covered in blood. Think of swinging a knife, for example. It leaves an arc pattern.
Ah, okay. So cast off means repeated motion.
Generally, yes. It strongly suggests a sustained, maybe even frenzied attack, not just one blow. A violent back and forth kind of interaction.
And the sheer amount of blood, reports said it was so thick and so heavy that it soaked through the hardwood floors and dripped into the basement. That's unimaginable.
It really is. And that volume, combined with the struggle signs, the cast-off, it led investigators to a pretty quick, chilling conclusion. This wasn't, some drug deal gone wrong or a random burglary. The evidence just didn't fit an opportunistic crime.
It pointed somewhere else entirely.
Right. It pointed directly to a crime driven by what they called unadulterated rage and hatred. This was personal, deeply personal, fueled by animosity.
And the local Blairsville police, as we said, hadn't handled a homicide in 20 years. What was their next step faced with this?
Well, exactly. They recognized pretty quickly they needed specialized help. They called in the Pennsylvania State Police, specifically for that forensic expertise. Their job was to be meticulous. Measurements, photos, painstakingly collecting every single bit of blood evidence for the lab.
You read descriptions of officers coming out with their protective booties just soaked in blood. And as they worked the scene, they found shoe prints, right? Leading towards the back.
They did. Shoe prints heading towards a back entrance through the kitchen area.
Did that give them an idea of how the killer moved?
It suggested the assailant probably came in through the back. And that idea was reinforced by blood smears found right on the back doorknob. It indicated the killer, with a bloody hand or maybe a glove, turned that knob to get out. So, likely escaping through the rear of the house. A key detail for figuring out the escape route.
So right from the start, it was clear this wasn't going to be solved just by pounding the pavement. The feeling was forensics was the key. It was a case that was going to be solved in the laboratory.
That was the assessment, yeah. All eyes on the lab work. 2, the victim, Dr. John Yelnick, a pillar of the community.
Okay, let's shift focus now to the victim himself. Understanding Dr. John Yelnick is just so central to grasping the whole tragedy here. He was 39, a young dentist, apparently incredibly popular. What kind of person was he?
John Yelnick really was, by all accounts, a pillar of that community.
Yeah.
Not just known, but genuinely loved by his patients, loved by his neighbors.
Hmm.
And when a crime this brutal happens to someone like that, someone so admired, the shockwaves are immense. It's harder for people to process.
Right, because it just doesn't compute.
Exactly. What's fascinating in a tragic way is how his good character almost deepened the trauma. This kind, generous person murdered in such a brutal, personal way. It creates this huge gap in understanding, makes closure really difficult.
And he had this lovely personal story too, didn't he? About fulfilling a childhood dream.
He did. Apparently, from a young age, he used to tell his own childhood dentist, I'm going to grow up, be a dentist, and come work with you.
Wow.
And he actually did it. Became
Yeah.
a partner in that very practice. It really speaks to his dedication, his gentle nature, traits he had even as a kid.
His background also gives some insight into why he was so generous, right? He was an only child, and his father died in a car accident when he was just months old.
Yeah, so he grew up with just his mother,
Well-
a small world in a way. And to kind of fill that space, he built this really wide circle of friends, created his own large supportive family, essentially.
And that seems connected to his giving nature.
I think so.
Yeah.
If we connect the dots, that early loss, that smaller family unit,
Hmm.
it seemed to shape this incredibly generous, open person. He was known for philanthropy in town. He'd give people loans, to buy cars if they needed to get to work or even to buy houses. It wasn't just charity. It was about supporting his community, his chosen family.
A friend mentioned something telling. John just wasn't aggressive, not assertive at all. Apparently, he always left his back door open.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and when asked why, he'd say, oh, neighborhood kids come over and borrow games or a movie.
Yeah.
Just that trusting, that open.
And that, in hindsight, while it's a beautiful quality, that openness, that trust, it tragically becomes a vulnerability, doesn't it? Believing the best in people, being so open.
Yeah.
It makes you susceptible, unfortunately. It's a sad irony that the things that made him so loved might have, in some twisted way, played a part in what happened.
Yeah. Everyone just consistently described him as a very positive, upbeat person, one of those rare people you generally felt better after having an interaction with. However, his death just left this huge, irreplaceable hole in Blairsville. The third, the gruesome anatomy of a murder. So, while Blairsville was reeling, investigators were waiting for the autopsy results. The scene hinted at extreme violence, but the medical examiner's findings, they were going to reveal the true horror of how John Yelnick died. What did the autopsy show?
Forensic pathologist Cyril Venn did the autopsy, and yeah, the findings were chilling. He found a multitude of injuries, but the most significant, the most immediately apparent were to the face and neck. It was clearly not a quick event. This was prolonged, brutal, targeting really vulnerable parts of the body.
The detail is just staggering. Apparently, John Yelnick had almost been decapitated. Literally. The ME said it wouldn't have taken much more to have had his head completely severed.
That level of violence it's almost unimaginable, pushing the absolute limits.
And it wasn't just the neck, was it?
No, not at all. The autopsy showed extensive injuries all over face, head, arms, hands, torso. Widespread wounds, clearly indicating quite a struggle. This powerfully refutes any idea of a quick, easy attack. It paints a picture of a desperate, prolonged fight for his life.
The report identified the most serious wound as that large gash across his neck and linked it directly to his head being forced through one of those decorative windows by the front door. How exactly did that happen? How did it cause his death?
The mechanics are brutal but critical.
Mhm.
When his head went through the glass, it shattered, but two small, triangular shards got stuck in the frame. As his head was then pulled back and forth through that broken window, those shards acted like saws. They sawed through his carotid artery. Yeah, causing immediate massive blood loss. The medical examiner was clear. That wound alone would have been sufficient to cause John's death.
But it didn't end there. Chillingly, there were other wounds applied after that, including something investigators called the coup de grace. What was that final act?
This part is particularly gruesome. It indicates pure malice. The assailant, the evidence suggested, straddled the dying, defenseless John Yelnick and then sliced him from ear to ear while looking into the eyes of his defenseless victim.
Just, wow, that's psychological torture as much as physical.
It's a final, intimate expression of utter hatred.
So this level of violence, this intimacy, it led to a very clear conclusion about the killer's mindset, didn't it?
Absolutely. The medical and forensic evidence pointed undeniably to personal malice. This wasn't random. It wasn't just about money, though that might play a part, we'll see. This was something that was done to express the virulent hostility and hatred of the individual who was murdering Dr. Yelmick. A message delivered with extreme brutality.
And that immediately narrows the focus, right? This deeply personal nature.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. 4. Early investigation. Suspicions and sidetracks. So, with this horrific personal crime, the immediate fear in Blairsville was intense. A killer's loose, maybe they'll strike again. What was the police's initial approach, given their lack of recent homicide experience?
Well, initially, the Blairsville PD, despite being out of their depth maybe, tried to maintain that standard open-mindedness. They had to consider all possibilities, cause, manner, potential suspects. But that raises a tough question, doesn't it? How do you stay open-minded when the scene itself is screaming a specific type of rage, a specific type of killer? It's a difficult balance.
And while there were no direct eyewitnesses to the murder itself, neighbors did hear things, disturbing things. Several mentioned hearing pig squeals. Can you imagine?
God, no, that's horrifying.
Right. And a couple neighbors heard men's voices. One boy specifically testified hearing someone say something like, "not giving any more money." What didn't investigators make of those sounds? Well, the sounds gave them early threads to pull on. Not giving any more money that could point to a financial motive, maybe an argument over debt, which is common. But the pig squeals, that suggests something far more terrifying. Primal screams of pain, maybe. It certainly aligns with the brutality the autopsy later confirmed. Vague clues, but indicative of a struggle and immense suffering.
Then, as they're processing the scene, investigators find something crucial. Right there on the coffee table next to John Yelnick's body. Papers. What were they?
Not just any papers. They were the divorce documents that John Yelnick was to sign the next day.
The next day. Wow.
And to make it even more chilling, these documents were blood-splattered, directly linking the imminent divorce to the murder scene. That immediately put John's estranged wife under the spotlight.
Which brings Michelle Yelnick into the picture. Still technically his wife, living nearby in Indiana with a state trooper named Kevin Foley. What happened when the police went to tell her the news?
Deputy Coroner and Officer Jill Gaston went to Michelle's home. And Officer Gaston noticed some things right away. Michelle apparently showed no reaction, didn't seem surprised, and maybe most telling, she never even asked how he died. That lack of basic human response immediately set off alarms for the officers.
That is strange.
Very. Gaston also noticed Michelle kept looking to Kevin Foley before answering questions, like she needed his okay. And then, crucially, Gaston saw Foley had a cut right above his eyebrow on his forehead. Looked fresh.
And Foley's reaction to her noticing the cut.
Also suspicious. Foley, remember, he's a homicide investigator himself. He apparently saw Gaston looking at the cut. Before she even asked, he just blurts out, "hockey."
Hockey without being asked.
Exactly. Gaston found that really odd. An unprompted defensive answer. It just added to the suspicion.
So based on all this, Michelle's lack of reaction, Foley's cut, his odd comment, Officer Gaston pushed for a search warrant for Foley's blood, right?
She did. She saw it as potentially vital evidence. But the district attorney refused. Said there wasn't enough probable cause at that early stage.
And that must have been incredibly frustrating for John's friends and family. They were apparently unanimous in suspecting Michelle and Kevin, felt their concerns were just being cast aside.
It seems so. And instead of focusing hard on them, the police reportedly chased some unfounded and bizarre motives.
Yeah.
Like this theory about a disgruntled dental patient denied pain meds that apparently never went really anywhere, just used up time while those closest to John felt the real leads were being ignored.
They even looked briefly at the neighbor, Tom, whose son found the body. Because Tom was friends with John and his wife, Melissa, there was some neighborhood gossip, but his shoe size didn't match the prints, so that was ruled out quickly.
Right. So despite everyone knowing about the messy divorce and the tripper boyfriend, investigators were being extremely cautious. Hesitant to zero in, maybe because of Foley's job. V, the turbulent marriage and escalating threats.
To really get the potential motives here, we need to rewind a bit, look at the years and months before the murder. John and Michelle Yelnick's relationship. It wasn't a sudden implosion. It had become increasingly turbulent and antagonistic. How did it all start?
Well, Michelle came from Johnstown, PA, described as maybe a wild child, a free spirit, possibly somewhat incorrigible. She'd been a Budweiser girl, worked in bars. That's actually where John met her. Her spirited nature, maybe that contrasted with John's more reserved personality, that possibly appealed to him. Plus, she had kids from a previous marriage. John didn't have kids, wanted a family. So this offered him an instant family.
And early on, John seemed all in, signed over his will to her, bought an expensive ring, they eloped to Vegas. But his friends started getting worried pretty quickly, didn't they? What was the main concern?
Yeah, the main concern was the money. The sheer amount John was spending on Michelle and her kids. Friends felt Michelle knew he was rich and wanted him to spend his money on her and her kids. And John, being generous, well, he did. Jewelry, expensive clothing, breast augmentation, teeth whitening, anything she wanted, anything the kids wanted. This lavish spending, driven by Michelle, worried people close to John. They saw his resources draining.
John really wanted a family. Michelle apparently told him she could not conceive, so they decided to adopt. Flew to Russia, adopted a little boy, nearly 2, named him John Jr., called him JJ. Looked like the family he dreamed of.
But sadly, that marital bliss proved fleeting. The marriage soured pretty quickly. Reports of mutual adultery, which obviously created some ill will. It all spiraled down. Michelle filed for divorce, and she was seeking a very, very, very sizable amount of his large estate. The financial stakes here were huge.
And this is where that financial motive becomes really stark, right? Driving a lot of the conflict. What were the specific numbers involved for Michelle with the divorce?
This is absolutely key. Michelle stood to lose about $2,800 a month in spousal support once the divorce was final. Why? Pennsylvania law. If you cohabitate or remarry, alimony gets cut off. Since she was living with Trooper Foley, her alimony was to be cut off, gone. The flip side. If he died, she stood to make $1 million.
$1 million versus losing nearly $3,000 a month. The incentive couldn't be clearer.
Pretty compelling, yeah.
Then the situation got even uglier. Michelle made this truly terrible accusation against John. What was that?
She accused John of sexually molesting their child, JJ. A completely baseless claim, but devastating. John was literally taken out of his dental office in handcuffs. He had to spend thousands upon thousands defending himself. It was a calculated move to ruin him, financially and reputationally.
And how did her relationship with Kevin Foley potentially play into this?
Well, the feeling was she essentially used Kevin and his law enforcement background to further her attacks on John. John himself was terrified about taking a lie detector for the investigation. He told his lawyer, "I don't know who's giving the polygraph. Is there a connection to Foley?" He was genuinely worried the process could be rigged because of her relationship with the trooper.
So he took an independent test first.
Yes, arranged through his lawyer. Both that test and the official one found him truthful. The court eventually determined the child had been coached, nothing had happened, it was all a ruse, part of her plan to embarrass him and get his estate.
Michelle's actions just got more and more disturbing. There was an incident involving JJ that was just abusive. Can you describe that?
It's shocking. John wanted to take JJ to Disney World during a dental convention. Michelle refused. John's lawyer had to go to court just to get his parental time enforced. So Michelle finally has to let JJ go. John goes to pick him up and finds JJ on the porch with his suitcase, but dressed in a dress with makeup, and it had his head shaved.
Oh my God, that's horrible.
John's lawyer immediately said, "That is abuse. That is the abuse of a child." It was clearly meant to humiliate John, cause him maximum pain.
So what does all this pattern of abuse, manipulation, what does it do to John, his state of mind?
It made him increasingly paranoid, fearful, understandably. When his lawyer suggested reporting Michelle's actions to the police, John's response was just heartbreaking. That's who she's dating. He felt powerless, trapped. Eventually, he just wanted out. I just want the divorce finalized, he said. Friends described it as seeing him systematically deassembled, brick by brick, just a shadow of the person he was.
And his fear became very specific, very real. Just a couple of weeks before he died, his car was vandalized overnight, spray painted. He told a friend he was pretty sure it was the trooper. But then his fear went even deeper, didn't it? That premonition we mentioned. What exactly did he tell his friend?
He directly said, I really feel he's going to kill me, meaning Foley. I'm going to send you $10,000 because I want you to investigate my murder.
He sent money to investigate his own murder.
Yeah. His reasoning was chillingly logical, coming from a place of terror. He's a homicide detective. If he kills me, the evidence is going to be buried just like me. No one will ever know he did it. He was convinced his life was in danger from a cop.
And the ultimate tragic irony. Those divorce papers, they were set to be signed that day, Thursday, April 13th, 2006. He just told his attorney, overnight these to me, get them signed ASAP.
And they never got signed. Because he was murdered that morning, investigators found them later, blood splattered. Part of the evidence, his premonition. Tragically, he was right. 6. The primary suspect emerges. Trooper Kevin Foley.
Okay, so given the brutal divorce, the huge financial motives, John's own terrifying predictions, the focus inevitably shifts to Michelle Yelnick and her lover, State Trooper Kevin Foley. John's friends, his family, they fondly maintain the investigation should focus right on them. But how did the police initially handle that?
Well, there was definite reluctance, at least at first. I mean, no one took lightly accusing a law enforcement officer of murder, especially not a homicide investigator for the Pennsylvania State Police. You immediately run into questions about the thin blue line, right? That unspoken code. Can police truly investigate one of their own impartially? They felt they had to be incredibly careful, cross every T and dot every I. Maybe too careful.
And Foley, on the surface, he looked like a model trooper. Respected, well-regarded, stationed in Indiana, member of the crime unit. If there was a homicide in his area, he'd normally be the one investigating it. Good track record.
Right. So you can see why colleagues, the community, might resist believing he could do something like this.
But behind that badge, a different story started to emerge, didn't it?
Yeah. Investigators eventually found that behind the public image lurked a deep and seething hatred for John Yelnick. Foley was physically impressive, in great shape, but people also described him as abrupt, someone who could bully people in investigations or in court. A darker side there.
And then there's this detail. Given how John was killed, Kevin Foley was a knife guy. What does that mean?
It means he was really big into knives. Colleagues saw him playing with them constantly at work, specifically commemorative Pennsylvania State Police knives that flicked open. These weren't just collectibles, they were described as very sturdy knives, very sharp knives. And the point was made. It wasn't you or me playing with a knife, it was Foley. His affinity for knives combined with a knife being the murder weapon. It's an ominous connection.
And his hatred for John wasn't exactly a secret among his colleagues either, was it?
Not at all. Troopers recalled him coming into the barracks and saying things like, hey, good morning. I wish John Yelnick was dead.
Yeah.
Not just once. Regularly. On occasion, he'd even say to other troopers, half joking, maybe, maybe not, would you help me kill John Yelnick?
He asked colleagues to help him kill John Yelnick.
Apparently so. Often dismissed as a dark joke at the time. But looking back, given everything else, a guy constantly playing with sharp knives, openly hating the victim, joking about killing him. It's deeply concerning.
Yet, despite all the hate, the knives, the jokes, nobody reported it up the chain when it was happening. Which brings us back to that question. Was this the thin blue line in action? Or just a failure to take disturbing comments seriously?
It definitely raises serious questions about internal culture, accountability. The Blairsville police did suggest early on, hey, you might want to look at Kevin Foley. But they didn't seem to take a long look. They did some interviews, but he wasn't their sole focus. And you've got that inherent challenge, police investigating police. It became pretty clear that if Foley was involved, you needed independent investigators to really ensure impartiality.
And adding fuel to the fire, Foley was reassigned pretty early on, wasn't he? Taken off the road, put on desk duty at a different barracks.
Yeah, that happened relatively soon after the murder, which, of course, made the family think, why would they do that if he's not a suspect? It looked like they were either protecting him or knew something was up.
So, John Yelnick's cousin, Marianne Clark, she feared the investigation was stalling or being compromised. She's described as very intelligent, very well-spoken, and she had connections. She decided to take action.
Her intervention was absolutely pivotal.
Yeah.
She made a bit of a racket, used her political friends, pushed to get the case taken away from local investigators and the local DA, and moved up to the state attorney general's office.
What did she tell the AG's office?
She went straight to them and said, look, the people you need to focus on are Kevin Foley, the state trooper, and his girlfriend, Michelle Yelnick. She emphasized they were the only two people who had expressed hatred for John Yelnick that she knew of. That direct advocacy coming from outside law enforcement forced a fresh look. And when the AG's office reviewed the existing file, it became very clear to them how things likely went down. They agreed. Extremely obvious this was not random. This was, number one, a brutal crime, a crime of hatred. So 7 plates open. Forensics and the Attorney General.
So the Attorney General's office takes over. And despite fears the initial investigation might have been soft-pedaled because Foley was a trooper, they actually found a bounty of evidence had been collected. The groundwork was solid. What did they zero in on first?
One really critical piece was those shoe prints from the crime scene. The initial investigators had diligently identified them as being from an Asics Gel Creed Plus, somewhere between a size 10 and a size 12.5. And that specific detail became huge because Asics, the shoe company, offered discounts to law enforcement. And guess what? Kevin Foley was one of their best customers.
No way. So they could link him to the brand.
Even better. Investigators dug up an invoice and a credit card receipt showing Kevin Foley had ordered a pair of Asics Gel Creed Plus, very similar name, maybe a typo in the report or memory size 10. It was a direct match for the style and size range found at the scene. Really powerful circumstantial evidence linking Foley right there.
Okay, that's huge.
Yeah.
What else did the AG's team leverage from the early work?
Another piece of really smart early work by the Blairsville police involved a Sheetz convenience store. They figured out the likely escape route from John's house to Foley's house in Indiana would pass this particular Sheetz. So right away they thought video. They got the surveillance footage from the gas bays, which conveniently showed the road too.
And did it show anything useful?
It showed something very useful. The video captured a vehicle that looked very, very much like Kevin Foley's, driving past that gas station shortly after the estimated time of the murder. And crucially, it was coming from the direction of John Yelnick's house and heading towards Kevin Foley's house.
Putting his car right on the path at the right time.
Exactly. Not definitive proof alone, but another strong piece placing Foley geographically near the crime scene around the time it happened.
By this point, the investigation the AG inherited was incredibly thorough, wasn't it? Interviews upon interviews.
Oh, yeah. Every neighbor had been interviewed multiple times. Same for every police officer that had worked with Foley, state troopers, crime scene investigators. It was less about gathering new testimony and more a matter of analysis. The consensus was clear. This case was going to hinge on the lab work, solved in the laboratory.
So what did that mean for the physical evidence? Had they found anything beyond John's own DNA?
Yes. Critically, they had found foreign DNA at the scene, not just John's blood. Proof positive someone else was there, involved in that struggle.
And where did this foreign DNA come from? What was the key piece of evidence?
It came from something seemingly routine done during the autopsy. Dr. Cyril V., the pathologist, had taken fingernail clippings from the victim. Standard procedure. He put them in an envelope, sealed it, gave it to the officers, and it was stored at the Blairsville PD. That simple step turned out to be the absolute key.
What did they find under his fingernails?
They found 2 distinct types of DNA. A mixture. 2 different people's DNA under John Yelnick's fingernails. Undeniable proof of a physical struggle. John fought back.
So they compared that other DNA profile to Foley.
Exactly. They got a search warrant for Foley's blood, ran the comparison, and yes, the other depositor of DNA matched Kevin Foley. Bingo, right.
Sounds like it. Case closed.
Well, not quite. There was a big complication. Because of all the blood at the scene, the sample under John's nails was heavily mixed, mostly John's DNA. The FBI's analysis methods at the time struggled with these complex mixtures. They could only generate a match statistic of about 1 in 13,000, which sounds okay, but in a state of 13 million people. Statistically, it was not compelling evidence, not strong enough to guarantee a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt.
So they knew it was Foley's DNA, but couldn't prove it strongly enough in court.
Pretty much. They were stuck. They had the match, but the numbers weren't convincing enough. It was a frustrating position. 8. The scientific revolution. True allele analysis.
Okay, so the investigation hits this wall with the DNA stats. But then the story takes this amazing turn. A real scientific breakthrough moment. They get a phone call.
Yeah, crucial phone call. It was from Dr. Mark Perlin's office. He'd recently developed this new way of analyzing DNA statistics through his company, cybergenetics. And cybergenetics at that time was actively looking for cases to test out their advanced methods. They saw the Yelnick case, with its tricky mixed DNA sample, as the perfect opportunity to show what their tech could do.
So what was different about Perlin's method? How could it help here when the FBI's couldn't get strong enough numbers?
The core innovation was this sophisticated computer program that he designed. It could do something the older methods really struggled with. It could mathematically separate out the different contributors in a complex DNA mixture. Traditional methods sometimes had to discard data or could only give limited stats on mixtures. Perlin's program could analyze all the data, get much more information, and thus more startling numerical results. It was a genuine game changer for complex samples like this.
So they applied this new program called True Allele to that crucial sample from John Yelnick's fingernails. How powerful was it?
It was incredibly powerful. Remember, the sample was like 93% Yelnick's DNA. But True Allele was able to computationally tease out and identify that small, distinct 7% of an unknown person. That 7%, previously kind of lost in the mix and statistically weak, was now isolated and ready for a much more precise analysis.
And the result? You said the FBI got 1 in 13,000. What did True Allele find?
The result was absolutely mind-blowing. True Allele determined that a match between that small 7% component and Trooper Foley was 189 billion times more probable than a coincidence.
Billion. With a B.
189 billion, yeah. That number it leaves no room for doubt, does it?
Not really. What did that mean for the investigators?
It meant everything. It essentially said there was no other person on Earth that could have that DNA profile other than Kevin Foley. This gave them the conclusive evidence needed to proceed with the arrest.
Sure.
Once they had that 189 billion number, they knew they had the final piece, the scientific breakthrough they needed to secure a conviction.
And this case actually became a landmark trial, didn't it? Because it was the first time that true DNA interpretation, this true allele system, was introduced as evidence in a trial like this.
That's right. It was a radical new technology for the courtroom. And because it was so new, it came under intense fire from the defense, naturally.
How did the defense attack it?
Their main argument was basically, look at all these different numbers. They pointed to the FBI's 13,000. Another lab at Boston University got 23 million using a different method, and now True Allele comes in with 189 billion. They argued, surely it's all unreliable. How can you trust these numbers when they're so different? They tried to paint True Allele as unproven, maybe even flawed, because it produced such a huge number compared to older methods that discarded some data.
That sounds like a potentially effective argument. How did the prosecution counter that? How did they explain it to the jury?
They used a really effective analogy. They basically said, imagine looking at something with the naked eye. You see some detail. Then you use a magnifying glass, you see more. But if you use a microscope that's the right microscope suited for the task on the same slide, you'll see far more information. True Allele was that powerful microscope. It wasn't changing the evidence. It was just revealing far more detail from the same evidence that the older, less powerful tools couldn't fully see. It used all the data.
That makes sense. The tool was just much better suited for a complex mixed sample.
Exactly. And that explanation, combined with the science behind True Allele meticulously separating the mixture, it convinced the jury. It cemented the DNA as the slam dunk evidence, leaving no reasonable doubt about Foley's guilt. It was the piece that pulled everything together. IX, justice served, conviction, and lasting impact.
So the DNA clinches it. They've got their man. But getting from arrest to trial, especially when you're prosecuting a state trooper, a homicide investigator, that's never simple, is it? Political sensitivities, professional loyalties.
Absolutely. It's a long road. And the community watching, they likely thought, okay, if they're actually arresting and prosecuting a trooper, the evidence must be incredibly strong. The very fact that it was a fellow law enforcement officer probably made people think prosecutors wouldn't rush into this. This must be thorough. That perception, born from the caution needed in such a case, likely added weight when the conviction finally came.
During the trial itself, when the prosecution laid out all its evidence, the shoe prints, the motive, the escalating threats, and then that bombshell DNA, it must have felt pretty strong.
But the defense fought back hard, right?
Oh, they did. Meticulous rebuttals. You could feel the tension, the worry creeping back in for those supporting John. The defense really hammered on the shoe prints, for example. They argued, hey, those shoes were never found. Anyone could have owned that type of ASICS shoe. Trying to create doubt about that link.
And what about the testimony regarding Foley's hatred for John? That was powerful, too. You had civilians, friends of John, testifying about the fear he expressed, and you had fellow state troopers testifying about Foley's open hatred, those comments wishing John dead, even that shocking account of Foley asking a colleague to help him kill him.
Did Foley himself testify?
He did. Took the stand for about 6 hours. He admitted, saying he wished John was dead but tried to brush it off. Claimed, "I was just kidding. I have a sense of humor like that."
Just kidding. After everything.
Yeah, tried to pass off venomous threats as dark humor. In light of everything else, it likely didn't land well with the jury.
And there was that suspicious detail about the knife, too.
Right. Foley, the guy known for constantly playing with knives in the barracks. He suddenly stopped playing with a knife the day after Dr. Yelnick's body was found. Just stopped. And then later, Michelle Yelnick sold that on eBay. Foley's commemorative state police knife, the very type he played with. Prosecutors strongly suspected that could have been the murder weapon, the timing, the disposal. Highly suspicious.
So, lots of circumstantial evidence, clear motive, Foley's own words and actions. But ultimately, what sealed it?
I really think despite all those other strong pieces, it came down to the DNA. That foreign DNA under John's fingernails, scientifically linked to Foley with that astronomical probability, that physical evidence showing John fought back and got his attacker's DNA,
Right.
that was what sealed the deal. Couldn't be explained away.
So the jury deliberates. And on March 19th, 2009, nearly 3 years after the murder, they come back late at night. What was the verdict?
Guilty. They convicted Kevin Foley of first-degree murder.
And the sentence?
Life imprisonment without parole. He was sent to SCI retreat in Luzerne County. Justice finally served.
There was a detail from the cross-examination of Foley about his demeanor. He showed no remorse. The prosecutor even said, "I'm not sure that he still has any remorse." Just cold.
Chilling. Which brings us to that lingering question. Michelle Yelnick. What was her role in all this? She was listed as an alibi witness for Foley, wasn't she?
Yeah, but she never testified, never made an appearance in the courtroom, which seemed very surprising to a lot of people, investigators included.
You'd think, right? Your partner's on trial for murdering your ex-husband. You'd show up. Her absence spoke volumes. Maybe complicity, maybe just wanting to avoid scrutiny altogether. We don't know for sure.
But it seems clear Foley really had no reason to hate John Yelnick but for his relationship with Michelle Yelnick. Her ill will towards John seemed to fuel Foley's own hatred, maybe even push him over the edge.
I think Foley's personality might have made him very rope for manipulation on Michelle's part. He identified so strongly with being a trooper, fighting for justice. So when Michelle fed him these false stories, "My ex abused me. He's sexually abusing our child," it apparently pushed all the right buttons. Maybe he saw himself as an avenger, a vigilante, justifying his actions in his own mind.
It's just tragic all around. Two men, John and Kevin, both fell hard for Michelle Yelnick, and it ended horribly for both of them. Outro. So we end up back in Blairsville, a community still grieving years later, mourning a gentle, loving soul, John Yelnick, taken from them for no good reason. The good life he built, the joy he shared, just overshadowed by this act of incredible malice.
The loss was profound. People still talk about him as one of the finest people they'd ever met. Kind, empathetic, passionate. His absence left a void, a real testament to the positive force he was.
The memories are still raw for many. Driving past his house, it's hard. It brings back the crime scene tape, the broken window, instead of the laughter, the good times people had there. One friend mentioned that even now, when they drive on Route 22 past the Blairsville exit, they always honk their horn. Just a little greeting to John, a quiet way to remember.
It's poignant. In this case, it also highlights how crucial law enforcement's role is, especially when investigating one of their own. It takes real integrity, real dedication. Like homicide investigators often say, they have to speak for the dead because they no longer have a voice. Someone definitely had to speak for John Yelnick.
And amidst all this tragedy, there is a positive legacy, remarkably. That true allele system, the DNA technology, pioneered in this very case. It has since been instrumental in solving thousands of cases nationwide. What started as a desperate search for truth in one small town actually helped revolutionize forensic science.
Absolutely. There was no question, once you understood that cutting-edge technology, that Kevin Foley was the murderer. True allele was the final piece that came together, provided that undeniable proof, and ultimately closed the cell door on Kevin Foley. A technological triumph born from heartbreak.
It leaves you thinking, doesn't it? In a world where personal hate, manipulation can lead to such awful outcomes, what's our responsibility? To question what we hear, maybe look deeper, ensure justice eventually prevails, especially when the lines blur between protector and predator, something to mull over, deep divers.